Grant Kleiber, who was here yesterday, I mentioned briefly, he sent me a quote from Isaiah when Jesus sent Isaiah, or God sent Isaiah out to spread the word, and he ended up calling them one of the remnants, who I guess are the very small percentage of the people who actually know the word and make an effort to get out and spread the word. And I guess it's fair to say that those of us who are gathered here today and online are part of the remnants, but and I think it's also fair to say that Tim Ball and Kevin Avram would have to be one of the heroes of the remnants, the people who literally were sort of ahead of their time talking about issues that needed to be talked about. For those of you who don't know, Kevin Avram was one of the original founders of the Canadian taxpayers, and Tim Ball, I guess I don't remember when I didn't know who Tim Ball was, but he goes back, he spent his life basically talking about all the things that seem so clear to us now, but they certainly weren't clear to people when he did it. And I think it was a horribly tiring thing for him. But nevertheless, we had asked Kim Purdy, has become dear friends with Tim and Marty Ball, and Kim was going to sort of pay a tribute to Tim, but she's had her own family tragedy this week and isn't here. So we're going to start by asking a friend of Kevin Avrams to come up, and Jim was introduced earlier, and you met his lovely daughter-in-law an hour or so ago. But Jim Ness was one of the freedom fighters that went to the border, and he and Rick Strankman ended up being roommates in jail. Maybe he'll want to tell you about that too, I don't know. But in any event, Rick said when they were getting ready to go to the border, they had, I think it was 50 or 60 or 70 people that were going to go to the border. But as the last 24 hours came along, sort of reality sank in, and call after call was saying, well, I'd really like to come, but I farm with my brother, or I'd really like to come, but I farm with my dad and my uncle, and we can't come, and I'd really like to come, but my wife and I are building a new house, and I won't be welcome home if I come with you. So I think the group got pretty small pretty fast, didn't it, Jim? But nevertheless, I think Jim and Rick sort of distinguished themselves by having the guts to do what needed to be done, and I think one of their inspirations was Kevin Avram. So I'll just, Jim, come up and tell us a little bit about Kevin Avram. So welcome, Jim Ness. Thank you.
I count it a privilege to have known a man, namely Kevin Avram, who had the most impact in my life of any other men. He taught me a lot of things about how you make change in your community. And he pointed out to me, a lot of conservatives tend to be reactionary by nature. They'll respond to an issue that needs to be changed, but it's like they're unprepared. They react, and there's no substance to their reaction. So he taught me how to be strategic. Conservatives have to be strategic in making change in the community or in the province. And we by nature think that it's the easiest way to make change is create a new political party or get a new leader of the present political party, and everything just goes in a circle, nothing changes. So I salute Kevin in that he opened my eyes on a lot of things. He explained to me how government holds us with three levers of power. The three levers are the ability to reward, the ability to punish, punitive action, and of course the third one is propaganda. And Kevin became involved in my life shortly after 23 Alberta farmers, including myself, took grain across the border in 1996 to challenge the Canadian Wheat Board monopoly, which was discriminating against wheat producers in Western Canada some of you may know this story, but maybe some of you don't. At that time, wheat producers in Ontario and Quebec could sell their wheat to anybody they wanted, but in the western provinces, we really didn't own the wheat. We couldn't sell the wheat to whoever we wanted because there was a Crown corporation who was making huge money for some liberal interests. And anyway, we learned that our $1 a bushel or whatever we were getting for wheat back then was actually supporting about 800 bureaucrats in Winnipeg that worked for the Canadian Wheat Board. And over in Minneapolis, Cargill had about 15 people that were employed for selling about the same amount of wheat as the 800 were in Winnipeg. And we grain producers, everybody complained, but when we organized a date to cross the border and challenge the government program, only 23 showed up. And of course, from that 23, there was numerous trials. We wanted to get them to court, but we didn't understand how change is made. When Kevin Avram came on the scene, and he was traveling all over Alberta with a Manitoba farmer that had spent 6 months in jail and had been strip searched 51 times in those 6 months. And he traveled all over the province with Andy McMecken from Manitoba. And Kevin didn't have any money. He was a justice fanatic like myself. And my friend Rick Strankman and I, we hooked up with Kevin about that time. And we went to his school, which meant spending a lot of time with him. And we determined very quickly for our Farmers for Justice movement to be successful in pushing for change, we had to have a strategic plan. And Kevin Avram was the brains behind bringing down the Canadian Wheat Board with our program of public disobedience. And so it took a while. We were up against the wall in 2002. The court system said you're going to have to pay your fine in a few months. The deadline is 1st of November 2002. So Kevin said we're going to maximize the publicity by having a media event the day you guys surrender at the Lethbridge Courthouse. So he advertised it. All the major news media with their biased liberal propaganda and questions, they were there. And of course, Kevin had sharpened us up for any potential interviews to answer them carefully. But it turned out to be very, very successful in that we went to jail, we embarrassed the Chrétien government, and we educated Canadians from one coast to the other about the effectiveness of publicizing this discriminatory act of Parliament that was put in 1943 that caused us to have restrictions on our grain sales, plus a large bureaucratic enterprise that was living off of us. So that was just one of the things that he was able to help us strategize to bring justice, a little area of justice where we gained freedom that we didn't have before. So I salute Kevin Avram today. He unfortunately was taken with a stroke some 6 or 7 years ago, and we lost a powerful voice. So if we had glasses of something to, I would ask for a toast to Kevin Avram and his input into freedom.
Kevin Avram, yeah.
To Kevin Avram. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And we haven't completely lost Kevin. He lives with his wife in a home in Lethbridge, but he can't talk. And he can understand, but he can't talk, and he can't read because the messages just don't work. But when you talk to him, he can nod and he can smile, and he knows that we're honoring him. And Jim is right. He had a knack of getting the message out. I think it was in 2012, we started what was called the Wild Rose Coffee Room, and Kevin was sort of facilitating it, and we had, I think, 14 Wild Rose candidates that were, we wrote a weekly letter to the newspaper, and then we would have weekly calls. But what it was doing was, he was helping educate the candidates and teach them how to talk relatively intelligently about some of the issues that we had to deal with. And one of my favorite ones was, as you know, we talked so much about, like, for 10 years after the Klein cuts, actually for 20 years after the Klein cuts, every time something goes wrong, like someone in the government will say, well, we're still suffering from the infrastructure deficit from the Klein cuts. And Kevin had written a letter in the 10 years following the first of the Klein cuts. The average spending on capital in Canada was $327 per capita, and 1 year in the 10 years following, Alberta spent $326. 5 years they spent more than $700 per capita, which was 5 times the Canadian average. And 2 years, they spent 5 times the Canadian average. They spent somewhere over $1,600 per capita. And so he had us all well briefed. So when someone, as you know, the Wild Rose was talking about being fiscally responsible, and invariably you would get a question, well, what are you going to do about the infrastructure deficit? And when you look at those numbers, like we said, well, we don't have it, like, if you've spent between 2 and 5 times the Canadian average and you still have an infrastructure deficit, it's not for lack of money, it's for improper tendering and probably corruption. But we had several candidates who called in after and said, yeah, the media asked me that question. I couldn't believe how I knocked it out of the park, and it was all as a result of Kevin. So yes, thank you, Jim, for saying that. Pat bought some real candle holders, and we're sort of calling this on the theme of Mother Teresa said, better to light a candle and curse the darkness. So I guess we're honoring them for lighting a candle in a sort of a dark situation. And the good news about the candles, which we forgot to pack and bring down, but we will send them to them. The good thing is they're real candle holders. So when we do get into the inevitable blackouts that we're heading towards, they will be one of a few people that actually have a candle holder in Alberta and in Marty Ball's case in Victoria. So now I think, did you want to put? I think we all recognize Tim Ball, and I think I think we can. When we're done, we'll send out John's blog post about Tim Ball. Like I say, Kim was prepared to talk about him and Marty, but since he's not here, we'll just know that we're going to send them their candle with a note from us and tell them how much we appreciated the effort they made to make a better world. So let's leave that at that. And we, as you know, I mentioned this earlier, we had 4 speakers this morning, and we didn't take time for questions. So how about if the 4 speakers from this morning come up to the front, and anybody who has a question for them can ask the question line up at the mic and ask them a question, and we'll just spend a few minutes answering some questions, and then when we get to 1 o'clock, we're going to have Dr. James Brown, who was an Assistant Deputy Minister of Education in Ontario, and when I talked to him about the Klein cuts, he said the same thing happened to them with Mike Harris. He said Mike Harris, when he cut back on educational funding, he said every education jurisdiction in Ontario except one actually got an increase. The cutback that they were talking about, they went from a 6% increase in spending to a 2%. So the media portrayed that as a cut in spending because the increase wasn't as big as they'd expected. But he said for the next 20 years, anything that went wrong in education in Ontario, they'd say, well, that's because of the Harris cuts. But in fact, virtually all the jurisdictions had got an increase except for one where he said the spending was just so totally out of control. I don't know if he'll touch on that this afternoon or not, but he said he's watching, so he'll maybe confirm if I had the story straight. Well, Marilyn, since you're there at the microphone and as our ladies and John are making their way up to the front, go ahead and ask your question. Well, actually, yes. Is Nadine here? Maybe Nadine's out feeding the baby. Is she okay? Well, I want Nadine to answer the question about the important thing that she skipped over when she gets here. But anyway, go ahead, Marilyn.
Thank you. This is for John. It's actually a suggestion of what you could add to your list of what we can do to make changes. And I suggest that we need to encourage our legislative representatives to stop making it mandatory for people who belong to a union that they must pay union dues. Because unions are becoming political activists. They are not serving the purpose that they began. And where are they getting their funding from to support all of these left-wing people they elect in every level of government? It's from all the union dues that they collect. So we really need to put some pressure on our governments at whatever level is needed to stop making union dues mandatory for union members.
Do you want to comment on that, John, or do you just want to nod your head and say, yes, I agree, we're going to do that?
There's nothing like nodding sagely, you know.
It works.
Also, it is a little bit hard to basically get rid of unions, which is what that amounts to. And I'm not sure it's something that I could commit to as a legislative agenda that I'd actually see get done.
Yes, go ahead. Michelle wants to comment on that. Go ahead.
I have a screenshot of the Manitoba QP saying, it's funny how the press always says that, you know, we align ourselves with the NDP. And they said, we actually are the NDP. And they are. They are the NDP. Yeah. So it's actually a political party that's also a union. And QP in Canada has actively blocked pipeline development. These are people paid from the public purse blocking jobs for other people.
Yeah, when the professors from the University of Alberta wrote that letter to Trudeau, asking to block the pipelines and shut down the pipelines and shut down the oil industry, it seemed to me that the leader of Alberta should have said, we're going to index, funding to the universities to resource revenue, because that's where the money comes from. And if you want it shut down, fine, but the first dollar cut's going to come. You'll be the one that goes. You know what I mean? But in any event, that's we're a long ways from having somebody who is prepared to do that. Although I guess our new Premier Danielle Smith is certainly talking tough about holding some of them to account. So I guess we'll see how we make out. Does anybody else have a question, or has everybody eat so many cookies that we've sort of gone into a chocolate stupor here? Over here we've got somebody who didn't eat too many cookies. Kathy.
Not yet, I only had one.
Okay.
I do have a question for John. Is your organization at all associated or affiliated, on the topic of unions, with the Alberta Parents Union that John Park has put together?
We're not.
I didn't think so.
We've been around for about 10 years, and a number of other groups have come and gone in that time. So I hope that Mr. Park has lots of success and is able to stick around and do something useful in the space.
I can't believe we have all this information and no questions, but in any event, I think here's my friend, like Bob Smith, who I affectionately call Bob Mills every second time. But anyway, thank you, Bob.
This was for Nadine, but she's not here. But her last little bit that she talked about was about humility. And I just thought a little bit of levity. I once knew a guy who got a medal for being humble. They took it away from him because he wore it.
Well, those are the chances you take, I guess, yes. Go ahead, Paul.
Question for Michelle. Who put those videos together? And John, was that a good tune that we can own? The La La Na Na? And are those here? Like, it looked like it was European, or tell us a little bit more about those videos and what you're able to do with them or have done with them so far.
The video was based on a song that was put together by Elsa Wittig and two other Swedish people. And they did the song more or less for Clintel. And then we put together the images. Mike Visser at the director's chair used, it's called story blocks. So they're pre-shot video clips, but you know, it's much more economical. But then you edit them all together and voila, you have the video. So it's on our website. Anybody can cross-post it anywhere you want. I think it gives people a happy feeling. It can be, you know, I often will post it on Twitter when I see someone, you know, sometimes people post really desperate comments on Twitter, you know, like, this is a dark day for me and I can't come to terms with what's going on, help me. You know, and I'll just post it and say, forget about the climate thing, just listen to this song, you can change your mind. Because I just can't stand the fact that so many people are depressed. So, you know, use it wherever you want, post it, cross-post it anywhere.
Thank you, Michelle. Art.
Yes, Art Hanger from Calgary. I was interested in John's approach to a campaign team. You mentioned that you apply what you call a campaign in a box or approach, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more to me about that, because if you could do it for $3,500, I'm not sure what the size of your campaign scope is, but I'd like to know a little bit more on how you bring that to be.
Well, one of the problems in politics, especially at the municipal level, is you spend half your time trying to figure out where you're going to get your supplies from. And often it's inadequate and not particularly well done. So what we did was we, first of all, sourced the database that you'd store your information in, website, an application for cell phones that will connect to that database. Then get a source for data about the size of a trustee campaign. So figured that into the cost and have a supplier for all these things. And then we went out and found where somebody in our network had found the best prices for signs and literature. So there's a couple of hundred lawn signs and things, and a few thousand pieces of literature. At least enough to get a basic campaign underway. And we also folded a little bit of money in there to get somebody to come out and train a group of candidates and their teams on how to use the tools and how to campaign in general. So it's a pretty basic campaign. If you get, say, 10 people, it's very effective. And I have reservations about the quality of the database. I'm thinking of upgrading that. But aside from that, it's quite complete.
How do we get it?
How do we get it is the question.
Well, that one is done by referral only. We don't take requests just over the transom. So you'd reach out to me, you'd say, hey, we met at the Freedom Talks conference. Can you help us out with the campaign in the box? And we'd put something together for you. We typically ask that groups come with a group of candidates, because otherwise some of those things depend on economy of scale, and it winds up being more expensive if we don't have about 10 people on it.
Great. Nadine will be here in a few minutes, and Santa Claus will be here in 36 days. So we got good news. We got good news for the kids and the grown-ups. Yes, Tom, I have a question for Ann, and then I'll let. Well, no, you ask your question, and then I'll ask Michael. Go ahead.
So earlier, it was very briefly talked about the cancel culture. And I note that back in the 70s, our famous Prime Minister said, as Jim Ness very well talked about, you farmers go sell your own wheat. And I think there was some kind of a flipping of which Justin kind of does now to us, which basically he flipped it to the truckers and to the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. And
it's a family tradition for them. Yes, you're right. Go ahead.
And so the long and the short of the whole thing is the cancel culture has been so ingrained in Canadian culture that I kind of posted some of this stuff on Agriville, and they're asking why, we had Remembrance Day of the war. Why are we still at war? And I posted the common law, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and don't do to others as you wouldn't want them to do to you. And that for every wrong there is a remedy. The end does not justify the means. Fundamental principles cannot be set aside to meet the demands of convenience or to prevent apparent hardship in a particular case. Ignorance of the law is no excuse for breaking the law. Two wrongs do not make a right, and one can enlarge the rights of the people. However, they cannot be taken away without their informed consent. And you know what the response I get? Jackson, go keep your religious feelings to yourself. And you know what the Commonwealth is? The prosperity created by the common law, because we respected Western civilization, respected these principles of respecting each other's right to choose and right to private property. And so if we no longer, as has been made quite clear over the last couple of days, have the right to educate our kids, and as was brought forward this morning, it's been ceded to the state, and now the rights of educating our kids have been ceded to the unions. And so how on earth the cancel culture has canceled the family, and now these powerful groups, and it doesn't matter if it's Amazon or the ATA or who it is, they're canceling all, and you know what? You don't have the right to say a thing if it goes back to the moral responsibility we have as each for our own actions, because that's religious, and you shut up and be quiet. So my question is, how on earth do we get that ground back? They created, because the Commonwealth is the wealth and prosperity of our Western civilization is created by the respect for each other and the respect for each other to own property. And if we can't have those principles, which God created in us to share with each other, how can we draw back from the ledge that is Putin and Hitler and Stalin?
Okay, I think we get the question. Would someone like to answer that in less time than it took to ask it? Go ahead, Anna. I think Anna has been giving a lot of thought to what do we do to take back some of these powers that they've taken from us. Go ahead, Anna.
Well, I have, and I've also attended, people with a lot more intellect and experience than I have, and the advice is, for one thing, if it doesn't make sense, do not comply. Another thing is absolutely demand. Canadians are so wonderful. We love each other. We don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers or anything, and we have defended minority rights. What is the smallest minority? The smallest minority is the individual. And so we must respect each of us as an individual, a unique, special life, and I think that's the crux of it. When our culture demands this, that will reflect in our constitution, our justice system, all these systems that are in place, which I think have failed flatly these last 2 years. And we cannot let some of these things that have happened to us slide. Mercy, showing mercy to people who have upset our families, destroyed our social systems. This is an injustice to the innocent people who have been trampled on. And I don't know, I'm going to try and keep the answer shorter than the question, Danny. No. That's about all I have to say on that.
Well, so. I think that's a pretty good answer, and don't underestimate your intellect. And, underestimate women from Clondonald. And we certainly don't underestimate your experience. And so thank you for being here, Scott. Did you want to comment on that or no? No, good. Scott, go ahead.
So, after having listened to talks yesterday, ones that I was here for and ones today, in many ways, we have been seemingly conquered on many fronts, but we have not been defeated. Freedom fighters all, let us arise and answer the call. Fight for the truth, fight for the right of self-determination, and anything else that you want to add to that list.
Thank you, Scott. I think we could have a round of applause for that. Yes, exactly. And but I think that's the whole point of why we're here. And now we've got one of our freedom fighters is back from being a baby raiser, and that's all good. So, what was the question we had for? Well, we'll let Art ask his question, and then we'll ask Nadine. Or go ahead, Art.
Yes, I have to really praise those that have stood in the front line and taken a lot of hits from the attackers, not only on the government side, but special interest groups. It seems to be the pattern of how, if you have an opposing opinion of what exists, whether it's government policy or a general sort of thought in the community, that you're a radical and you deserve to be attacked. I can remember that when the Reform Party started, there were untold thousands of man-hours put into developing policy to bring to Ottawa. And the idea was that we as reformers would represent the people that elected us, and that was the message that we would bring to Ottawa. That was the full intent. And the ideas that were drafted were far from radical. But to express them in the environment of Ottawa, or even, I would have to say, Edmonton, they were treated as radical. And so you don't have to be radical when it comes to this political machinery that's out there. But there's a pattern that is set up. The special interest groups will look at it as being a threat. Yes, they are definitely tied to certain political parties. And so they do the dirty work of the politicians that will be kind enough to question you and say, well, look what this person is saying about you. You're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're anti-this or anti-that. And so the politicians walk as if they were, blessed with this endowment to say that, this is really what you are, and they say it in a nice way, whereas the special interest groups are the ones that are doing the ugly work. Now, when I listen to the comments of so many of the presenters today, there's a threshold. And when you cross the threshold, it's a different story. You have taken the initiative that, no, what I am saying is a very reasonable thing. I'm asking a legitimate question. I would like a legitimate answer. and the attack comes, and then one of two responses can take place. You can run away in fear, which many do. They run away with, I can't take this kind of abuse. Or you can move forward. You know on the ground that you stand on is accurate. So I don't know what it is, and maybe it's just a personal thing that everyone has to go through, but there seems to be no one around to instruct an individual that has an issue to stand up and say, this is what's going to happen to you when you oppose the prevailing thought. And so no one seems to be around to offer advice. Keep on going. But if you go back, you lose the ground and you regret the day that you ever did it. But I would like some comments from those that have stood on the front line and have experienced that thing.
I'll make a very brief comment. The first time I met Art Hanger was at one of these conferences, and I walked in by myself and had nowhere to sit, and I asked if I could join them, and I thought I was sitting next to John Wayne. Like, honestly, there's Art Hanger MP. It was such an honor. I think Pat Hozak gave the best advice I've ever heard. You know, don't quit, just take a rest.
The other advice she had is like don't say anything till you've had 2 good sleeps too. I'd be a lot better off if I'd taken that advice a few times, but in any event, it still is good advice, but you're right, yeah.
Well, I think that you have to stand on the principle that if freedom of speech is fundamental to society, then whatever I want to say, I have a right to say it. You also have a right to disagree with it. And I have a right to continue to make my case. And this should be conducted in an open, civil manner. So I think that's really important. Whenever I'm engaging with people, I try not to get mad at them. And I try to just continue to say, well, you know, I have a right to present this point of view. And it's essential in society that we hear these different points of view. And a rational, dissenting point of view should always be welcome, even if a person doesn't agree with it.
Well, you know, the definition of politics is taken from the Greek word poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking insects. But the folks who did the protest against the wheat board actually offer you a good pattern. What they did was political judo. And when you're going to be doing something that your opposition is going to paint as radical, you need to bear their lesson in mind. What they did was they provoked the Canadian government into an overreaction. That was the point of that scene at the courthouse. And the overreaction was seen. That's what embarrassed the Chrétien government, right? And you want to do that everywhere, that you're going to be attracting some flack. You need to be a little more radical, just enough to push their buttons and get that disproportionate reaction. If you can get a pile-on from all the unions, and then you can stand up and note, hey, everybody, look at the pile-on from the unions, right? Here's CUPE, here's the Teachers Association, and so forth. And they're all connected, and here it is coming as a backup to the Liberals and the NDP. Everyone sees what's going on, and that is embarrassing for your opponents. So you want that reaction. You want them to scream at you in the hallways, and you want to do it for the camera.
Well, and the other thing you want to do, and John talked about this, I think he talks about it pretty much whenever he speaks. He says, say it with a smile. Like they try to portray us as the angry people. And he said, just say it with a smile. Be polite. Try not to swear. Like, I mean, I think we've all become so frustrated with government in the last year. I've heard more people, including myself, swearing than I've heard in a lifetime. So try not to swear, particularly on social media. One of the things I do that I think is reasonably effective, I'll get somebody like cursing me out on Twitter, and I always just respond like, does your mother know you're picking on a senior citizen on social media? And then usually they go away, you know what I mean? And so anyway, go ahead.
Can I
question.
just add
Oh, sorry,
just
I'm
a little
sorry.
bit?
Yeah.
This is such a big one because you guys may be in a similar situation than we are or we've been the last year. So you want to be completely equipped. One of the things, I remember that first day after the Scott Moe call and mainstream media just destroying my name in there. I remember my husband came home and I broke down crying. I'm like, that is not who I am. I knew that wasn't who I was, but you start second guessing yourself because the attacks come and come and come. So how to prepare is warn people ahead of time that these attacks are going to come. Warn them they're going to come from people you least expect it. The part that hurt the most for me wasn't the mainstream media. I expected that. But it was also from people from our side. We forget that that happens too. And those are the ones that you least expect and that hurt the most. So that's one of the things that I would say to you guys. People will turn on you if you become any type of figure. Like, look at the convoy. You have Tamara, who's such a kind soul, but yet you have a group on the far right completely destroying her. And instead of just saying, hey, can we just all work together? So that's a really important question. So if you guys get put in that situation, know who you are and don't let them make you believe that you're something else, and expect the shots to come from everywhere, and don't let it deter you.
Well, yeah, you're right, Nadine. And the other thing that I think that people, I get a lot of people that say, oh, I follow you on Twitter. I don't tweet or anything. I follow you on Twitter. But one of the things you can do is some of these comments, like when you make a comment, they can like your comment. So then you look at it and you think, well, lots of people like it too. There's some negative things there too. Martin Luther King said, he said, it's not the words of your foes that hurts the most. It's the silence of your friends. And see, that's one of the things where you see, like, when you get into these fights, if your friends speak up for you, like all of a sudden you think, okay, well, I'm all right. Like, my friends are still here. But I think some of you who are very supportive friends, that's one of the things you can do. And it looks like Elon Musk, whatever his name is going to make Twitter a place where we can continue to get our message out, and we'll be less likely than we had been to be blocked going into the next election cycle. But for those who aren't necessarily tweeters, you can certainly follow the messages, and you can like them and support them that way, or add direct message them too. The odd direct message. At one point in time, I had the Alberta beef producers having a special meeting to throw me out as being the chairman of the beef producers, and it's a little bit disconcerting. But I was so busy, I thought, well, if they do, I'll have less to do. But in any event, a dear old lady I saw at the mall just before I had to fly off to the meeting, and she said, I sure liked what you said on the radio, but apparently some of my other beef producer friends hadn't. But this was a dear, sweet lady. All it takes is one or two people says, I like what you had to say, and it sort of gives you the courage to go on. Go ahead, now it's your turn.
Hi, I'm Deanne Truen from Mountain View Freedom, and in listening to things, I get a picture of, collectively we are stronger, and I get a picture of the fact that we are standing among giants, but we are also giants, and I see a picture of Canada where the giants in BC reach over and hold the hands of the giants in Alberta, who then reach into Saskatchewan, who then reach on and on and on. And collectively, we will win this. I know in my heart we will. That's sort of my poetic thing, but I had a question for John, actually. You said that you hope the Alberta Parents Union is successful. What can we do to actually help them be successful?
Well, I don't think the Alberta Parents Union's aims are very clear right now. I believe they're doing a petition at the moment, so I suppose one could sign their petition. But in general, their agenda isn't clear yet, and they'll need some time to develop that.
I think what John's saying is he's the head of a group that's Alberta Parents for Choice in Education, and their mission is very clear. And I mean, the best thing you could do is help John's group do really well, and then I guess this other group could follow what you're doing if they wanted to, could they?
God willing, yes.
Yeah, God willing, yes, yeah, exactly. Tom?
Thanks very much, Danny. I had a little talk with Jim Ness, and it really comes back. The Matthew 24:9. Then you will be arrested and handed over to be punished and put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me. Many will give up their faith at that time. They will betray one another and hate one another. Then many false prophets will appear and fool many people. Such will be the spread of evil that many people's love will grow cold. But whoever holds out to the end will be saved. And we're talking about physical, not spiritual salvation. And Matthew 4 starts out with, be not deceived. That is our message to everyone. Don't be deceived by the cancel culture, by the climate change people, by the people who say sexuality is a fluid thing. How do we get that message forward, which is the most important of the longest speech that Jesus Christ gave? The first thing he said was, do not be deceived.
Well,
So how do we get that message across?
Go ahead, Nadine.
This week, I was kind of asking that, and not just us, how do we not get deceived? How do you get the rest of the world not deceived? And God gave me a word, bold. And I'm like, okay, that's not a lot. So I usually will go and search different verses, and he gave me Philippians 1. Sorry, I take a lot of my leading and stuff from God. So not everyone's a believer here, but it's still, the principle will still apply. He said, I don't know the exact verse, but I'll tell you what I understood from it. I believe it was Paul that was in jail, and he was telling them, you're going to have people who are going to use my message for really good reasons. You're going to have people who are going to say the exact same thing, but it'll come from selfish reasons. And you'll have people that will attack my message. But either way, it doesn't matter how they all use it, that message is still going out there to the masses. So how do you not be deceived? It doesn't matter how someone is receiving it or how much someone is spreading it. The fact that it's going out to the masses, you'll have some people in the middle that will be like, oh, I didn't know about that. So just know, just by sending it out in every aspect, even if it's for evil reasons, they're doing it. That message is still getting out there. So, and it's still waking up the masses. And do it boldly, do it fearlessly. That's what I have to say for that.
Do you want to comment on that, Ann, or no, you're good? Okay, go ahead, Ann.
Do you have a comment? Come to Freedom Talk.
You just got a free registration for next time. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So, on a practical level, and I find myself almost always being practical, which is a funny thing for a philosopher.
You're turning into your father.
Yeah, really. Well, I gotta say, my father started getting smarter every year since I turned 18.
Yeah, that's right.
But on a practical level, something you can do to help people from being deceived is that you can be easy to understand. Now, I say this because I've mentioned the idea of message discipline before. If you're going to be a candidate for a school board, you need to start about now to be really clear about what you're talking about. You need to be talking about education and nothing else. If you want to be an advocate on something like vaccines, you need to talk about vaccines and nothing else. Pick one lane and stay in it for a good long while. Try not to talk about multiple subjects, right? You don't get to talk about vaccines and climate change, because as soon as you're engaging somebody on vaccines, they'll talk about climate change with you, and the message gets lost in the middle.
Okay.
So be clear and have a single subject.
Michelle, who was talking about three things this morning, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. Well, I wasn't trying to run to be a trustee.
No.
So that's the difference. Because sometimes things do overlap. But I think, kind of like what I did this morning, you know, when there's something out there, lots of people will be deceived. Think of all the people who read that New York Times article by that professor. And they said, oh, he's a professor, and he's written a number of books, and lots of famous people like his work, and therefore what he's writing here must be great. Plus, this peer-reviewed paper, it was published in a journal, so it must be authentic and it must be true. You know, and so all I did was some basic research and questioned the assumptions in the paper and questioned the crazy talk of this professor, and you know, and exposed the fallacies of the whole argument. So that's how people are not deceived, because you go in and you do some research and say, you know, this just doesn't sound right. I mean, if you're going to go vegan, and we live in Canada and it's winter here most of the year, we're going to starve to death, right? So once you start just looking at the basic assumptions and revealing them and doing some more research, and that's what you have to do when people come up with these sort of pat phrases and comments, and they didn't mean anything about you, Pat, where, you know, you have to challenge them and be willing to stand your ground and say, you know, it doesn't make sense, let's look at the facts, let's go deeper. So expose it, then you won't
Yeah,
be
we got to get, fair enough, we won't take any more questions, we'll just have one more comment. I get to have the last comment, as luck would have it. Speaking of do not be deceived, one of the surest ways not to be deceived is to be well informed, and one of the surest ways to be well informed is to buy some of those books, like they're at the back. Andrew's book is there, Michael's books are there. It's 38 days till Christmas, in case I haven't mentioned that before. And no, all joking aside, if you're on a school board, or if you're on a committee at home, buy a few books, take them home, take them to the people on your committee, and be sure that you have one of the best informed committees that we have. And I mean, going back to my story about Kevin Avram and the 14 candidates for the Wild Rose. Out of that Wild Rose coffee room, 7 of them got elected, and a good part of the reason that they got elected was, I think, when they were talking to the voters, they were the best informed person in the room. And to me, you know, do me a favor, buy some of, do me a big favor, because I told Andrew, don't worry, like, you bring the books, if you don't get them all sold, I'll take them home and sell them to my friends. And so, like, I'm doing my selling right now. So anybody that hasn't got Andrew's book, you can get it autographed if you get it today. Of course, Michael's here, and he'll autograph any of the books you buy for him. So I think we've had a pretty good run. I think we've got about 7 minutes until Dr. James Brown is going to be speaking. So let's take, if anybody needs a bathroom break besides me, we've got 7 minutes, and then we'll tune in James S. Brown, and we'll see what he has to say. So thank you. Give a warm round of applause to all of our participants. Thank you very much. 7 minutes, we'll be listening to Dr. Brown.